Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. Happy belated May the 4th. Today we are building this ATST from Bandai in 1:48 scale. It is a very nice looking kit with some pretty crisp looking details, so I'm pretty excited to start assembling it and do something different from the usual tanks and planes that you can see on this channel. Let's get right into it. The assembly starts by connecting together parts of the middle structure, sort of. The part that has the legs and the turret, or well, the cabin, I guess, connected to, so the middle. Here I noticed something very interesting. After cleaning the parts, I started connecting them together, found out the fitting is very nice, and then I realized that this kit is fully made to be a snap kit in a way, so even if you're not a modeler, as long as you're a Star Wars fan and you might want to get your hands on a Star Wars vehicle, this Bandai kit is perfect for you, because you can assemble it together without any glue and technically without any paint as well, since it's already grey. Of course, I'm gonna paint mine. The assembly went together really nicely. There were no particularly fiddly parts in any way, since this is a larger scale kit. The fiddliest were probably these little lines or tubes that run along the vehicle. But they were really easy to assemble as well, and they give the vehicle quite interesting detail you don't usually see on normal tank kits. Really, I must say, Bandai, I'm impressed. The assembly was just so simple. It reminded me of Tamiya with even less glue in a way. Of course, I glued my bits, but as I said, you don't necessarily need to. And the detail was quite fabulous as well. Of course, it's not a real vehicle and I'm no ATST expert, but from what I can see here, everything that needs to be there is there, and it's looking really nice and crisp, and it's gonna take paint like nothing. Of course, otherwise it's very similar to normal tank kits, but what's really cool, and this would be perfect for a diorama, which I originally wanted to do, but I ended up not doing. The limbs, the legs are completely positionable. They are kind of limited by some pins, but once I cut those off, the positioning was very useful, and it allowed the vehicle to be in a really dynamic pose. Which is something I'm missing, because usually they are just standing on two legs doing nothing, but I think they should have greater range for intimidation. Once the legs were assembled, I could move on to the cockpit, I suppose. It's not really a turret, but I guess it's a cabin or a cockpit of sorts, I guess you could call it that. Again, it's just large pieces that go together really nicely. They snap fit together, which I used because I wanted to paint the interior, since it's again very nicely detailed, as you can see here. Oh, well, you actually can. Now you can, yes. You can see that all the gauges are there. Of course, this is no plain cockpit, but I was pretty surprised to see this detail, because, you know, it's not the most usual thing to see an ATST from the interior in the movies. I know it's been shown, but it's not usual, and I just really want to paint it, so let's get right into it. Since the pieces are large and go together so easily, I don't need to show you how I build it. Let's just go into painting. Now, the main references that I found for painting the cockpit usually show it in a boring grey color, and while that's probably accurate, I've seen some other modelers painting them in a greenish color, and I decided to do the same as well, and that's because I'm painting the exterior in a camouflage, so I thought it would be a little more interesting than a plain grey cockpit. The colors I'm using for this are the new Atom acrylic colors from Ammo, and I must say I really like them so far. This was my first time trying them out. As you can see here, I didn't even use any primer because I thought it was sort of pointless, so I sort of just started spraying the color onto the bare surface, and it went on really easily, and it had pretty good coverage, the color looked really nice and crisp, and I must say I was really pleased with the result. Once the cockpit was base coated in the green color, I decided to start painting some of the tinier details with a paintbrush, and I decided that I wanted to have fun with it. I again didn't go through any specific research on which button is what supposed to be what. I knew generally what's supposed to be in the cockpit, so I just started putting on some different colors just to create some layering and some differentiation to make it interesting to look at. This worked in my opinion pretty nicely. I think the cockpit ended up looking pretty interesting with putting on some different bright colors like blues, reds and yellows to pick up all the little buttons and the little screens, just so it looks a little more diverse. There wasn't much rhyme and reason to what I painted in what way. I just thought, oh, this would look cool, so I did it. That's basically the entire system I had in my head. It wasn't too hard. Again, I was using the AK 3rd gens and the new atoms for this, painting them with a normal paintbrush, and they went on really nicely. These are definitely the paints I would recommend for brush painting, since they are easy to clean off from the paintbrush. They dry really quickly and they don't stink, so you are just left with fun with no additional bother of cleaning your paintbrush and whatnot. Since once it was done I hadn't necessarily varnished the surface, I decided to use a acrylic wash instead of an enamel one as all my other models. This is a sort of game wash from Vallejo, and it behaves kind of differently to a normal wash. Therefore I slapped it all over the surface, which outlined the details and also stained the green to make it look a little dirtier, which was an effect that I personally really enjoyed how it looked. So once this was done, I basically called the cockpit finished. I don't think I necessarily need to bore you with the rest of the assembly. It really is just some really big pieces getting sandwiched together, and I must say, maybe you hear this often on some really good fitting kits, that they are like Lego, but this one is literally like Lego. It's basically designed to do that, and it went together really nicely. I really enjoyed how I could keep it openable so I can see all the work that I put into the cockpit, but otherwise nothing special, nothing really interesting happened after this, no footage, no nothing, so I think we can move on to the painting. Again, I really appreciate the dry fitability. It allowed me to separate the model into separate parts for painting. Now here what you can see I'm doing is I'm priming the model, which is usually the first step in painting. This is a Vallejo Makeup Black Primer. Primer is sort of a first color, a primary color that you put onto a model. If you're curious why you would do that, it is a little different to a ordinary color in its consistency, and it's got a bit of a rougher texture, which allows the subsequent layers to grip onto the surface more easily. For the painting, I wanted the model to be a little more unique and mine in a way. And I want to go the usual way of making a grey ATST. Even though I love making grey tanks, don't get me wrong, grey Tigers and grey Panzers, that's definitely something you're gonna see here often because it's really the most fun thing for me to paint. But I wanted to do something a little more interesting on the ATST, so as you can see here I started spraying it with some green. Again, this is the atom color. I decided not to go with any fancy schmancy post shading this time, because I am doing it in a two-tone camouflage and that's something I've always struggled with. And the easiest way to resolve the issue of not knowing how to post shade a double colored model is to not post shade it at all. This is completely unrelated to Night Shift stopping to post shade these models. Anyway, after spraying the entire surface with the green, I could start masking the model in a way. Actually, before I did that, one of the legs did get a grey scheme, just to make it look a little more scavenged in a way. I don't want it to look like it's a rebel ATST, but I want it to look like an ATST that's been in a service for a while. And from what I've heard, these things would be in service very long, until the pilots would die of radiation because they were sitting next to a radioactive battery in the back of the turret. But that's unrelated. I painted the leg grey. The camouflage was sort of mainly just big rectangles and triangles and sharp angles, just to give it a sort of more futuristic look. It is inspired by a camouflage I saw on Brit Modeler that some person made, but is not complete replica. I did use only 2 shades of green. I wanted to use 3, but I opted not to because I really liked how it looked as it was. So I just sprayed on the lighter, more desaturated green over this darker green that I masked. Actually, this was mixed from an atom green and a light color from 3rd gen AK, which means you can mix them, and it worked pretty well, so that's also a big plus that I've noted. Once all that was sprayed, here you can see I still wasn't completely decided if I'm doing some Wunderwaffe or a Star Wars vehicle. I ended up doing a Star Wars vehicle, but I wanted to add a sort of rusty primer plate onto the side so it looks sort of repaired in a way. I think this really made the head look red. And also, sorry that I'm not showing how I'm spraying the camouflage onto the other parts, but it's really the same, and the turret shows it the best since it's so flat. This time I made sure not to forget to record the removing of the mask process, because it's really one of the most satisfying parts of making a camouflage. So here you go, some mask removing. Enough of artificially prolonging the video. Now I started to do some, I don't know, I guess markings on the leg and parts of the vehicle, just to make it a little more interesting to look at. The marks on the leg, of course, making really no sense, and I don't really know where I was going with them, but I also added this number on the reddish plate, which I think looks pretty cool. With all the gun barrels and the hose painted black and the decals applied with varnish over that, we could get into the final home run home stretch, or just stretch of the project, by starting to apply the washes over all of the details. These are ammo enamel washes. They go over all the details, making sure they pick them out. That's basically what you use them for, sort of outlining the detail and making it look a little more visible. After thinning the wash a little bit because it was too thick, I decided to use it in a sort of weathering way, just to make the vehicle look even more grimy and dulled than what the next FX will do. And I think this worked out pretty well. It outlined all the details. Again, I applied it everywhere, but you don't necessarily need to see me applying it around the leg joints, since it's exactly the same as, for example, here on the... I keep calling it turret head, whatever. One of those. I don't know if the Star Wars materials chipped or rusted, but I thought it would bring the vehicle more to life, so I started adding some chipping. At first I thought it would be possible to do with a brush, later, well, I mean obviously it would, but I decided to switch to a sponge because it looks a little more realistic and better, and I just covered the entire vehicle with sponge chipping. If you don't know how this works, essentially you take a paint, in this case it was atom chipping paint, you dip the sponge into it, then you unload it onto a napkin or a paper, and then you start dipping the entire surface until you're satisfied with the result. With all the chipping now applied, you can see that the surface looks really gnarly and just realistic in a way, beaten up, old. I really like that. So I decided to add some streaking effects as well, and now I've seen a lot of YouTubers and modelers trying different techniques how to do good looking streaks. First it was oils, then it was enamels, now it's one of those basically pencils from ammo as well, but what I found was that ordinary acrylic works pretty well. As you can see here, I'm using a light rust acrylic. I think this is the AKA 3rd gen. I diluted heavily and I just softly drag my brush downwards, painting on the streak. And I guess it's not that soft, but it's a little more visible. But I personally really like it this way, so I applied this everywhere I thought it would look good, especially underneath the shell impact on the front that I drilled way back. Something I really wanted to do, since this vehicle has so many joints, was oil and grease streaks. I did this by mixing black paint with a gloss varnish, and as you can see I heavily applied it and streaked it everywhere I saw the, well, where joints were, and also I think there are actually like caps for refilling the grease, or maybe it only looks like it. I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be. To me it looked like caps from a grease cap, so I added some grease streaks. They weren't as shiny as I wanted them, so then I went over them with the gloss varnish, again with a paintbrush. The final effect before moving on to the dust and mud was just adding silver to the impacts to make them look like shiny destroyed metal. I decided that I'm gonna finish up the model with acrylics as well, so first thing I did was a sort of acrylic dust wash that you've seen me probably do several times. This is a heavily diluted acrylic color with water, of course. In this case it's a, again, AK 3rd gen, this time it's buff or deck 10, I can't quite remember, but I brush it on in a streaking motion around the entire lower leg. Since acrylics dry really fast, you can layer the effect on very easily. This is what I really enjoy about them. I applied it on the sides of the turret as well, especially because I have that reddish piece there, and it looks really good when you have a primed reddish plate with dust streaks. So I applied them on the side just to make it look a little more interesting. Again, it's literally the same as on the legs. The remaining effects were done by speckling some browns and blacks onto the lower legs and just everywhere that was dusty. This really pulled everything together, and I think it finished the look of the model, and therefore we can go to the glamour shot. So the 8ST is now finished, and you know, I never like to pat myself on the back, but I really love how this model came together. I think it looks pretty cool, pretty weathered, pretty realistic. I'm really proud of it, but of course you will be the judge of that as the viewer. So please let me know down in the comments what you think about the model. Let me give me a like, subscribe if you really liked it and want to see some more project like this in the future. I would love to do some more sci-fi. It gives me a little more freedom than usual, and I really enjoy that. However, with that being said, this is really it for today's video. I again really hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed May the 4th. I know this is a little late, but I had to finish the model before I could even start finishing the video. And now it's finished, so better late than never, as they say. So yeah, again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.